What's your first memory of wanting to be an author?
Oy vey. I tell people that when I was little, I was always reading and I always had a book and paper and pen or pencil until I was allowed to have pens. You know how it is when you're little, they don't trust you with a pen. And
They trusted me. I'm sorry to hear they didn't trust you.
Okay, so we've discovered something about Lisa. She's not allowed to have sharp objects. But anyway, but I was always sitting underneath the Rose of Sharon tree in my backyard, which I say it was a tree, although it's technically a bush because it was so big. It was just huge. And I would sit there and I would read and I would write and I would draw. And then when they cut it down, only because for a stupid reason, they cut it down. I went searching for another little sanctuary, and my neighbor had this tree grove, and there was this little spot near the base of a couple of the trees where it kind of, and I had bug problems or something, but it allowed me enough room I could squeeze in there and then sit down and have it as my little fortress. But I've always read, always written, and always drawn. So I can't remember a time where I wasn't wanting to write or wasn't writing.
Did you ever see yourself doing illustrations for one of your books?
Actually, yes. That was sort of my plan, was to be an author and illustrator. Back when I was in school, and we've talked about this, I'm a young child. And we've known each other for 10 years, and we met when we were 12. And so I'm young. And but when I was little, they didn't have a lot of like advanced placement classes. They did what they called stretch classes. And they put me in art stretch because they were she's either going to be in art stretch or music stretch or something with English and grammar and writing stretch. So they kind of fought over me a little bit. They weren't sure which word to put me because that's my wheelhouse, those two things, writing, and then music was big too. But they didn't have a lot of kids who were great at art. So they're like, we really want to pump up our art program. So they put me in there. And then I took private art lessons for years. And so I thought I would be like an artist who also writes, And so then in high school, I had this art teacher that I did not like. And so I dropped out of art, and I was just going to take some blow off class just to tick her off, quite frankly. And my friend I was a sophomore in high school and she was a senior, and she said, take creative writing because, it's a blow off class and all the seniors are taking it. You'll be the only sophomore. That'd be really cool, right? Because sophomores being around a senior is cool. And so I did. And as soon as I sat down, someone else came in, and it was this guy from the basketball team, the star of the basketball team, whom I had a huge crush on. And he sits down like right catty corner in front of me. And I look over at my friend and she starts grinning because she knew he was going to be in the class and she knew that I liked him. And, it was like this thing. So anyway, the first thing we did was write a poem. And because the goal of the teacher was to get us published, she entered our poems into a poetry contest at Indiana University, Kokomo. And mine won something, I don't know. And so then as a class, we read the 5 top poems, and the teacher was like, don't evaluate Lisa's because, you've all read each other's poems already. Well, of course they hadn't read each other's poems because they're seniors and it's a blow-off class and they're not going to do their homework, right? But they had no idea this was my poem. So when we circle up, right, they all had chosen my poem as their favorite. And I hadn't, obviously, because actually I really like this other one. And so got around to him, And the teacher was getting frustrated. He was like the next to last person. She's like, people, I said, don't pick Lisa's because we've already read it. And they're like, oh yeah, well, we didn't read it. And, but he looked at me, and I mean, he really looked at me, like he saw me for the first time. And I'd been in
like Avatar, I see you, that kind of thing.
Yes, I see you. And, but he, you know, I'd been in classes with him for almost a year, and he probably wouldn't have known me if he ran over me with his car, you know. But he looks at me, and he really looks at me, and he's like, "You wrote this?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I nodded because I couldn't talk, and he's like, "This is really good," and I was like, you know, because I'm speechless. And how do you know me to ever be speechless, Rob? Right? So
well,
you
high
know
school, you, I assume, was probably about the same.
So the gravity of this moment, if you know how few times I'm speechless in life. And then he said, no, you're like really good. Like you're a really good writer. And then he's like, can I have a copy of this poem? And I'm thinking, dude, you've got it in your hand. But he wanted like a pretty copy. So I typed him up one. But what he never knew was it was a love poem about him. Isn't that the funny part? I think that's the funny part.
You didn't make it more explicit when you typed up his special version?
No. That's the other podcast, the one that comes on after midnight. And it's not geared towards children. No.
Stay tuned for that, esteemed audience.
But no, I did not. I was extra careful. I wanted it to be perfect. And but anyway, and then when I gave it to him, he was like so excited because I thought by the next day he'd forget, right? But he was so excited. But that kind of changed. I was like, it started making me think, well, maybe I should be a writer who illustrates. You know what I mean? So it just kind of flipped everything that I had thought. And then I got into college, and it was so hard. Ball State has a really good art program, and it's really hard to get in there. I mean, you have to be like a declared art major and be almost ready to graduate before you can start taking classes. So I was just like, well, I don't want to have a minor in it. You know, I mean, I was just like, I'm going to be here like extra years just to get this minor in art or something. So I let the art go, but I did take private watercolor lessons for about 5 years as an adult. And I started back up in the spring this year. So art's a very big part of my life, but I don't think I'll ever illustrate because I am not that good. And because I've been out of it for so long, it feels rusty to me. You know, it would be like trying to write after not writing for 10 years. You know, you just felt clunky. But I love, it's relaxing for me, and it's a whole other outlet for me. And it's just fun to see what I can do. But so, did that answer your question in a very long, long way?
That was a wonderful story. Made more wonderful by the fact that I know that you and this gentleman have been married for 40 years now.
I sometimes run into him, like not run into him, but I like see him out and about in town. And I just want to go up to him sometimes and go, do you know? But I don't.
You should go up, give him a copy of Starfish and be like, that wasn't my last poem. Here's a bunch of poems. And then sign it and just write, I love you, real tiny on it. And just wait till come to the library and that romance that we've been waiting for.
Yeah. No, I don't think his wife would like that at all.
No, probably not. Well, maybe. just write, I love you both, and that will solve the problem.
There you go.